and reconvene open session at 11:02 a.m. No final decisions were made and no votes were taken into executive session. The public phone line has been unmuted and representatives of the meeting may once again report all board discussions and actions.
Okay, this is Bob. In case number 22-10409, this case is closed and substantiated, and pursuant to the board's direction, HLO will draft a letter to the respondent. We needed to do a vote, didn't we?
We need a motion, a second, and a vote.
Oh yeah, so I made the motion. We need someone to. I'm sorry, out of practice. I need someone to affirm that, accept the motion, and someone to second it.
I affirm the motion. This is Brenna.
I second the motion. This is Jenny White.
Okay. And now roll call.
A motion has been made. I'll call roll. Megan Johns, aye. Brenna Lagarde,
Aye.
Corey Stump,
Aye.
Marie McMahon,
Aye.
Jennifer White.
Aye.
Okay, and for the record, Brad did leave the meeting at 11 a.m. But we still have quorum. All right.
Do you want to go over the updated, get to other board business, do the interventionist statistics, or Nathan do it?
Well, we can have Nathan do it.
Okay.
Because I didn't get that. I can't get it. So Megan, you can read the public interested parties feedback.
At this time, the Behavior Analysis Regulatory Board will hear public and interested parties' feedback. Once recognized, please state your name and affiliation to the board for the record.
On the phone, this is Bob at HLO. Is there anybody that would like to make a public comment? Doesn't sound like anybody does. So we can move on to other board business.
Can you guys give me maybe like 10 minutes and call me back so I can look at a couple of things?
We may not be here that long.
I'm sorry, boss. That wasn't meant for you. That was meant for another call.
Okay. Don't forget to mute yourself. So Nathan, since I've got you, you had some updated stats for us?
I did. I'll just share the screen if that'll work for you, if that's the
That'll
best
work.
way to do it. Okay, so this is the one slide that was definitely off. I had selected the wrong column apparently when I was updating it. This is the actual numbers for the behavior analysis interventionists compared to that's the behavior analysis and then the interventionist. So you can see the numbers are quite a bit different.
Yeah. Okay. Any questions on that slide?
Get the materials updated to reflect that.
All right. Thanks, Nathan.
Thank you.
Okay. So was there some discussion around ethics that the board wanted to engage in at this time?
I think yes. So we understand that our sort of previously articulated plan to adopt the BCBA's current ethical code has some, is problematic. Would require or could require getting their permission to adapt it to the legal requirements of Oregon law and our statutory authority, and this is not flexibility that organization has shown in past analogous circumstances. And so we can decide to pursue that path anyway, or we can decide to just leave our ethical rules the way they are, or with some minor changes, or we can decide to create our own ethical code. And I guess I'll say, because I'm already talking, that I'm a little uncomfortable, like, as it stands from what we understand, right? As it stands, there are certain provisions of our current ethical code that are likely not enforceable under our statutory authority in Oregon law, and it does make me uncomfortable to have rules that we can't really enforce for a bunch of different reasons. So if we didn't feel like we had a real alternative but to go that route, then I'd get in line. But I think enforceable rules are better.
This is McMahon. I'm interested in. I think it's important for licensees and for the public just to have a sense of what the ethics are for those providers for them. And I'm interested in trying to figure out what are in considering developing our own ethics code that helps clearly guide us as well as licensees for what expectations are.
This is Corey Stump. Is this an okay time for me to comment on something?
Sure.
Okay. So I had an idea, and I don't know if this is something that we will all agree on, but kind of as like a backup plan. In terms of the interventionists adapting to, or the behavior analysts adapting to new ethics codes, we possibly, I don't know if we can do this, but I'm thinking if we could add like an additional attestation to licensure or renewal of licensure that states that they have reviewed the current ethics codes. And if there are any specific ones that we can't uphold in the state of Oregon, that it be like an attestation of recognition that these are the ethics codes that they're upheld to. If they're not licensed from the BACB or not credentialed by the BACB, they don't fall under jurisdiction of the BACB either. But a lot of practitioners, all behavior analysts in the state of Oregon must be licensed through the BACB, not necessarily interventionists, but some are, depending on the organization that they come through. But the attestation itself could state that they could be subject to disciplinary action through the BACB by way of signing an attestation that states that the board could have regulatory power to report them to the BACB. So basically, it's not us saying that we are holding them liable, but instead, as a plan B, we're saying, okay, you recognize that this is something that could happen as a precautionary type of measure, is my thought.
I mean, if we could do, if I could do anything I wanted, I would go through the 2023 BACB ethical rules, and I would pick the ones that are enforceable in Oregon and add what we wanted to add, like the disciplinary policy, and that's what we would do. And the reason I would do that is because, these rules are a little subjective. And, like if our rules are different enough from the BACB's rules to avoid any copyright infringement concerns, they're going to be like substantially different, right? But they're going to cover basically the same kind of subject matter. and I think that's hopelessly confusing and, the risk of getting lawyery, right? Like it raises the risk that, the BACB is going to interpret their rule to, apply in this way to certain conduct, and we're going to be applying a different standard to the same conduct and may end up coming out in a different place. So, on the one hand, like I look at the psych rules and go, those seem fine to me. But on the other hand, I think it's confusing, given that we're adopting BACB licensure to then apply, topically similar but linguistically different set of ethical rules, and so, and so I think that what would be best for the profession is if we adopted, a version that is heavily, based on the BACB's, rules. And while, they haven't been a particularly flexible organization before, and if the, I don't know, yeah, I guess I'm gonna leave it there because otherwise I get into stuff that we shouldn't talk about in open session.
This is Ann. Can I get some clarification, Brenna?
Yeah.
When you began your thought, you said the 2023.
Sorry.
BACB, do you mean 2022, or are you talking about the ones that are in place now?
2022.
The
The ones we
newest.
were talking about. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry
so
about
your
that.
thought, just to read back what you said, your idea would be to go through the 2022, the newest thing, and see if there are chunks that, we can talk to them about their openness to allow us to take a slice out of their pie and use it. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, I would go through their current ethical rules and I'd redline out all the provisions that we can't enforce or maybe don't want to enforce, right? And then, I would tell them this is what I think this is best for the profession. And I would tell them this is what we want to do. And I would say there's no trademark issues here because we're not using your trademarks, and there's no copyright issues here because you can't sue us anyway. So why don't we just pretend like this is your idea and go on with our lives?
Okay. It's my understanding though, just so that we all understand, and I hear what you're saying. They define things a little differently. So we might have to look at that. And this might take some time, but I believe I understood what you would prefer. Board, what say you? Marie, you have your hand up.
I'm sorry. I left my hand up too long.
No, that's okay.
So,
is anyone else kind of leaning the way Brenna's leaning, which is to try to look at what they have and see if there's anything we can use and if they would allow us to do that?
This is Megan. So I agree that I think it's really important for everyone that's certified under the state to have some really concrete rules and jurisdiction, in terms of what we can and can't do. Obviously, I feel like it may require additional work in terms of creating I'm open to either adopting from the BACB and going that route, or just trying to work within the capacity of, what we already have in place and then adding to based on our impression of what's important, maybe either from rules that the BACB has in place or other states and what their rules are, to be able to make sure that we're providing the highest quality of services and making sure that we have the most amount of regulation on our staff for the state.
Okay, just to be clear, to make sure everybody understands, because there was some questions earlier, the statutes do not allow us to place ethical standards requirements on interventionists. So they're out of the picture completely. So just the lens of the behavior analysts and the assistant behavior analysts. When we're looking at, and I'm getting in the Wayback Machine from when we adopted the previous ethical standards. And we adopted sections 1 through 9, which, if I remember correctly, seem to be a lot of fundamental concepts of behavior analysis. This is what everybody should be doing. This is, you know, we use scientific methods. We are honest in our data collection and transparent. Has the profession changed so much as to make those basic concepts outdated? Do you need to start from zero with a vacant lot and start building the house? Or can you kind of look at the 2016 ones and say, there are some things here that work, so why reinvent the wheel? There's some things here that have changed in the last few years. I speak of the Sexual Offense Treatment Board. Just to give you an example of what they did, because Heather had mentioned this earlier, there's a national organization called ATSA, the Association for the Treatment of Sexual Abusers, and they have different practice standards for working with adult clients and working with juveniles. And our board took issue with some of their approaches with juveniles, and they wanted to whole cloth it, just come up with a whole new thing. So I put a work crew together. They met for a year. And after sitting down and trying to begin from scratch, they kind of hit a wall. And I said, okay, if you like all of this, what don't you like? And I parsed out that there was simply the use of polygraphs on juveniles. They didn't want to build the whole house. They wanted to change one window. So it took a while to get there. And they went, oh, you mean we can adopt everything except the section on polygraphs and kind of do our own jam? I said, you absolutely can. I mean, of course, with DOJ blessing. So that's another option, is going through and saying, okay, this is the foundation of the house. This works. We don't agree with X. We can do our own flavor in this area. That's another option that's available to you if that serves.
So, I mean, to the DOJ blessing part, from an intellectual property perspective, I'm not quite grasping the difference between, you know, redlining the 2016, I guess, rules and redlining the 2022 rules. Maybe I should have asked that before. I guess so. Let's maybe put a pin in that.
Okay, so perhaps we can ask our experts to go through 2016, what we have now, 2022, and are you more interested in things we can do or taking out the things we can't?
So I am, of course, a non-BCBA, and so I defer to my more knowledgeable colleagues on a lot of this, right? But from my perspective, you know, like, I'm unaware of how the current rules are deficient, except that I understand that they contain things that we actually can't enforce. And so if the BCBAs on the board told me that, like, this is fine, except for the stuff that we can't enforce, I'd be like, sure, you know?
This is why, I was just gonna say, I feel like I need more information personally. Like, one thing I would like to do is the BACB has a crosswalk document which outlines the differences between the old code and the new code. So I'd really want to look at that. And I'd also like to get kind of that list, I guess, of things that aren't enforceable, just so that I know what I'm working with and able to make an educated decision.
Okay, I'm seeing some nodding. So, okay, oh, I have
This is
thumbs up.
Megan. I agree.
Okay, so what about this? What if I go back to my little laboratory and I can get you, because I downloaded them for the meeting a year ago when this whole conversation started, and I can get the current standards, I can get the new ones. If you like, I can send those out to the board. I'm not sure the mechanism of the crosswalk, if that's something that you have to go to the website for, or if that's something that I can also deliver to you.
This is what is a PDF document on the BACB website.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I can retrieve that. I can send the crosswalk, those 2 documents. And while the board is reviewing that, I'm making a note to myself while I'm talking, always dangerous. The 2 ethical documents. And then if you like, while the board is reviewing that, I can reach out to DOJ and find out, you want to know what is unenforceable in the current standards, or would you also like to know what is, because the unenforceable in the 2022 was, the word I think they used was nightmare. Would you, would you like me to redline out the 2022 or just the 2026?
2016.
Or 2016, I'm sorry. What is unenforceable in 2016 or both?
This is
What's
why I
unenforceable
like
in
both.
2016 is most important to me. This is Brenna, sorry.
This is why I personally would like both, but I apologize for saying that because I know that's extra extra work.
Well, no, it's always okay to ask. They can't say yes if you don't ask, you know? So it might be something where they can maybe draw some broad strokes. They don't have to get down in the weeds. They can just come up with some broad concepts so that you can then take those concepts and use that lens to look at the document. Does that make sense? Okay, so what we're looking at is what is unenforceable with what we have now, and broad concepts of unenforceable in 2022 or problematic areas. Am I capturing that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Pardon me while I'm typing. Enforceable, problematic in 2022. Okay. Now, with all this being said, is the board comfortable with me going ahead and sending this information that I can get from my laboratory and putting this ask perhaps on the agenda for July, which is our next meeting? Are we comfortable with that? Now, there's something, oh, I have a thumbs up from Brenna, great. There's something else I can do if this makes you happy, because that's my job, whenever possible. I can go out, I have some states that I look to. Every state has its own flavor when it comes to licensing. Like Nevada has control issues. Arizona has trust issues. Like they all have kind of a flavor. I can kind of poke around and see if there's anything that's sort of what I feel matches your value flavor, and just see if there's anything out there, because some of them are just so different. I mean, like Nevada didn't even want to go with the BCBA. The BACB. They want, or yeah, BCBA, whatever. They wanted everything under the Board of Psychology, and they wanted to do everything themselves. Their exams, they wanted to control the whole thing. So, but there might be something there that we can extract. So I'm happy to kind of do a look around for that too. Does that work?
Yeah, I mean, so this is Brenna. Like, at first I'm like, screw them, we'll write our own. And then I thought, well, but all the BCBAs are going to be doing continuing legal education or continuing education, ethics education, right, on the BCBA rules. Are we going to have like Oregon?
If they say,
yeah, are we going to have? Yeah, and so are we going to have like Oregon specific ethics? We could, but like that's kind of out of our hands. And so, how's that going to work? And that's why I got, I like a law. It's based like the rules are super similar, but
right. Maria.
Yeah, this is McMahon. I would agree. I think first figuring out, I think what those differences are and what sort of matters, and if there seem to be some hiccups in psychology, there are Oregon-specific ethics rules for psychologists. So it does happen in other fields at times, but I agree that looking first to see if that's necessary, it seems like a really reasonable first step.
Okay, because that's why I asked the question. Has your profession changed so much that the foundation of the house is no longer valid? Or is data collection and not defrauding your clients, are those concepts? Well, no, I mean, are those concepts still the foundation of the practice, with maybe some little details here and there that we could freshen up? Why reinvent the wheel? So if you're okay with that, I can send you those documents. I'll look to other states and see what they've done. And if, and I'll also reach out to our friends at DOJ and see if they can, in a reasonable amount of time, come up with the parts of the 2016 standards that make them uncomfortable and the parts of the 2022 that make them uncomfortable, and see if we can get some uncomfortable themes.
And I would also maybe ask our friends at the DOJ, like how they feel about our redlining the 2016 rules, if the same kinds of concerns, if they have the same kinds of concerns with our redlining the 2016 rules as they do with our redlining the 22 rules.
Okay. I think that's a terrific question, Brenna. Thank you.
I hesitate to ask.
Well,
but I'm curious.
When we started out, we didn't know what we didn't know, right? I mean, we brought this up from the ground. You were there, and you don't know what you're going to smash into. And now we've got a little bit more mileage behind us. We know some areas that are likely to be a little problematic, but are they still? We don't know. We can ask. But I do know that I've had both very positive experiences with the National Association and some things not so much. But they change too. So we can just sort of see where we are.
They may have chilled, or they may have different people making those decisions, or,
Well, they do put a lot of work into their materials. They put a lot of work into their organization. And I do know that when I was reaching out, when the question came up about the QABA last year, I needed historical stuff, and they went in the Wayback Machine and they got me everything in a very timely manner, and they were incredibly helpful. So we'll put that out there, and a lot of them were the same people. So we'll just give it a try. So have I collected the asks from everybody? Megan, you're not on the camera, so I don't know. Are you okay?
Yes, sorry. I have children that have entered the house, so I figured that would be best. Not on video.
No, it's totally okay. I just don't want you to feel alone just because you're a dot and not a Brady Bunch square. So.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I also appreciate all of the gathering of information that you're going to collect. That sounds great.
Hey, I think I've shown you I got a big drift net and I'm not afraid to use it. So was there anything else in other board business that we need to get for you? Because if so, I will slide over and let Bob take over and continue taking notes. But are we okay on this topic?
I did have a clarifying question. This is White. You mentioned so our interventionists cannot have an ethical code. Is that what I heard?
According to your statutes, the requirements are for interventionists. And remember, as a government entity, we only have the powers that we're given, right? And it says on there for licensure of behavior analysts and assistant behavior analysts that they have to be X number of years old. They have to do these things, and they have to comply to, the ethical standards set forth by the board, or I think it was professional methods and procedures set forth by the BARB. I believe that was the language. Interventionists they have to be 18 years old. That little section just says receive ongoing training and supervision by an individual licensed by the board or listed as, and that came up with the professions that have behavior analysis in their scope. But it doesn't say anything about adhering to any standards. You have training and ongoing supervision. That's it.
Because that was a concern of mine as these conversations about the current ethics code came up, is that since the old days, when all of this started, there is now an RBT specific ethical code. And so I think that's a consideration for us, that that perhaps that needs to be changed, or obviously it's much more complicated than I ever realized, but something to think about.
That would take a legislative change, Jennifer, and that would be something that an individual, not as a board member, but in their capacity as a practitioner or a private citizen, could get a concept through to introduce that into your statutes. That's not something that we have the authority to do now. I see Corey has her hand up. I'm sorry, Jennifer, did that help you with your question?
That does help me with my question. I do have a follow-up
Oh, please,
question
please.
that's related somewhat,
Mhm.
but not exactly the same. I'm also wondering, just because I wasn't here in those beginning stages, the competency assessment that are currently used by the BARB for interventionists, the BACB also has a competency assessment that is different, and I think there are some differences there. And so the one thing I was wondering to bring up was, is that something we would want to look at, is adopting the BACB's competency assessments? They have an initial competency assessment and an ongoing competency assessment, or, what the thinking was behind that, as I wasn't,
Right.
present for those things.
That's a great question. And that's a point of contention that we did hit with that organization. Was we had originally, when all this began, was hoping to use their competency assessment, their task list more specifically, of what people needed to know before they went into the field. And we adopted it into proposed rules. And then I think a day or two before the permanent rules, there was a legal challenge. And they said, you cannot use our task list for people that are not required to be part of our organization. So they did claim intellectual property on that task list. And we had to scramble to extract, as we will with the ethical standards, extract the core principles on the fly and come up with something in time to get the program rolling. So that was something that was a very, very hot, scary time.
Oh,
So I'd be reluctant. I'd be very reluctant to get near that. Megan?
This is Megan. On the note of our competency assessment, I know that's something that is just recently brought up, but I do feel like even if we don't, obviously being able to adopt the BACB's one is maybe out of the question, but is it possible to revise the one that we currently have? Because I do feel like there are some questions on that aren't my favorite.
Okay, now that's a terrific question. If you feel that the core knowledge in the competency assessment, the task list, things you have to know before you perform services, that is absolutely something that we can update, because that was our information, that was our proprietary list, that's what we did. So yeah, if you want, I can bring that to the next meeting. And we can look at what's in it, what we need to change. And if we simply in rule refer to our competency assessment, we can update the competency assessment on a much quicker time frame than if it was adopted, the actual text of the competency assessment was in rule. You know what I'm saying? So we can do a pass through on that, and we can absolutely look at updating that. Jennifer, would that get to some of your concerns?
It would, yes.
Oh, well, let's do it. I can get away from my PTSD moment there.
Oh my God.
Yay. See, there
I have the
was
same, like, oh my God, these people. Yeah. Like,
I'm not gonna these people them, but that was a very, and I was a fairly new analyst then, and I went right through my deodorant that day. So Corey, what can we do for you?
Hi, yeah, this is Corey Stump. I was definitely, Jenny and I raised our hands right about the same time, and I think we both had that same light bulb of, but there is an RBT code of ethics. And there has been now for quite some time where RBTs have been held to the same ethical standard. However, it was never created in just an extra document for them. It was basically, on the BACB's code of ethics for behavior analysts and assistant behavior analysts. It was just kind of like hyphened for RBTs, is like, this one applies to RBTs too. And so it's been there a long time, but because there is no separate, it's almost like something we just kind of glossed over. But if there's a way, if we're taking a look at the competency assessment itself, can we include some of those ethical type behaviors that we expect of them as competencies, that we can kind of embed them in there. So like documentation competencies and the ethics of data collection and incident reporting and abuse reporting and all of those types of things as specific competencies. I think that could be an easy way to just simply get some of those items into the competency assessment. And it could also be helpful too that if we're writing those in rule, if we can have the competency assessments include a signature from the technician and the BCBA, just like the RBT competency assessment does. So it identifies that they have recognized that they're responsible for these items, and have that be part of the application packet. It's there, but it's not required for submission. Same thing with the supervision log is there, but it's not on the actual list for application submission documents to be kept on file. So unless the RB or the technician or the interventionist and the analyst keep those for their own records like they're supposed to, then the state doesn't have any kind of signed document from either of those providers stating that they do recognize those items as competencies. So I think that could be something that, if it's possible for us to change for that application packet, that could be helpful too.
That's all really great information. And while you were talking, I went ahead and grabbed my big book of rules. And what's interesting is the documentation of 40 hours of professional training that is required for initial registration as an interventionist. In the list of things, it has to say, of all the things you work on, you have to be trained in professional and ethical issues, foundational knowledge of behavioral change principles, assessment, implementation of prescribed intervention plans, data collection, and documentation. So according to this, in the initial 40 hours of your professional training, ethical issues and professional issues should be part of your initial training. Now, we have to be really careful. I mean, we can just say some basic ethical issues there. If we got there, we'd have to see how much of this concept we could introduce into the task list, the necessary task list, before we started getting in the scary area of, well, we really, and that might be one of the redlined areas, that if we don't have in 676-815 the authority to impose any kind of professional standards or ethical requirements, sort of slipping it in here or there, are we entering an area that at a later meeting we're going to end up having to redline? That's something that is around the gray areas, and I would definitely need some guidance on that. Megan, you have your hand up.
What would be the process if we wanted to put in, add to, would it have to go through legislation or whatever to get some more ethical expectations on behavior interventionists?
Well, if you wanted the broadest stroke, it would be to have your statutes opened, to go before the legislation, and just as in 676-810, board duties, licensure, behavior analysts, and assistant behavior analysts, on number 4, it says the behavior analyst regulatory board, that's you, shall adopt rules to establish guidelines for the professional methods and procedures to be used as individuals licensed under this section, right? That section only has analysts and assistant behavior analysts. If you wanted to have interventionists, you could have that same concept added to the interventionist statute, which is 676-815. Okay, that is the clearest way to do it. Because again, if it's not there, we can't do it. Okay, and I know that was something that was frustrating on and off for a number of years, is that, these are the folks that are maybe having the most face time with clients, but don't have that in their statutes. And I think that's why our board at the time introduced it as part of the 40 hours of training. Because, and again, in your statute, it says must prove, oh, here it is, number 4, have completed at least 40 hours of professional training and applied behavior analysis approved by the office by rule. And I think that's when the board at the time said, okay, well, maybe we can get a little bit of professional behavior and ethics in that 40 hours of training if we can't get it anywhere else. Okay, so does that make sense to everybody? If you want more and you want clearer authority, it would take a statutory change.
Thank you.
Of course.
And this is why, to confirm, to make that change, that's not a board thing. We would have to go as like
Correct. Right now, the hats that you're wearing, all shiny, are executive branch hats, which means that the legislature makes the rules, the executive branch carries them out, and the judicial branch interprets them. Okay, so with this hat on, it would not be under your purview to go to the legislature and make changes. Your job is to make whatever they decided work, to do what they say. However, as Jennifer White, the practitioner, as Corey Stump, the mom, or in any other capacity, you certainly can put a piece of legislation through or go testify on behalf of legislation. We simply ask you, when you sit down, either when you submit your testimony or sit down in front of committee, to say, while I am a member of the Behavior Analysis Regulatory Board, I am not here in that capacity. I am here as a practitioner. I am here of my own volition, and that way they know you're not speaking on behalf of the board. You're speaking as a professional or a mom or an advocate. You have to put it on record what hat you're wearing.
And as an interested individual in this area, when I'm doing things like that, I start with a phone call to Paul Turdall. Who's usually working a couple legislative concepts anyway.
He's on this topic already, though, isn't he? He's aware.
I should remember, but I don't. I actually sent him an email asking if he's working on this issue or not. If he's working on other issues.
Well, and again, I don't want to know about but as long as you're not representing the board, that's absolutely fine. I do know that the legislation that's out there, one is the provisional interventionist that Bob mentioned earlier. And within that, it says that an interventionist registration has to be issued by the office within 5 days. And that, of course, gets around the whole background check issue and everything, but does get somebody out into the field quicker. And then if they have to apply for a full registration, and if they're declined, their registration becomes their provisional becomes null and void, or when they're issued a permanent one, the provisional becomes null and void. There's the other piece that Paul Turdell has his name on, and that's the one regarding the banning that behavior analysis professionals cannot participate in conversion therapy, that minor children can seek mental health help from a behavior analyst without parental consent, that behavior analysis professionals become part of the mandatory child abuse reporters. And then there's a little minor tweak in there about disciplinary authority and the health licensing office. It's a technical fix, and I believe it has a lot to do with that whole Title Act piece, but I'm not as versed on that. And then there's a couple of other things out there. One is about telehealth professionals that are out of state can help people in state that I thought perhaps might impact your board, and that's why I'm watching that one. But whatever else he has going on, there might be something, because we get the initial, it's like snow off a roof. You get the initial thump, and you dig out of that, and you pop your head out, and then there's more thump, and you dig out of that, and then later on, you can get a snowball here, a snowball there legislatively. They can even do what's called a gut and stuff, where somebody has a concept moving, and there's just like a placeholder bill with what's called a relating to clause on it, and it might just say relating to healthcare, and it's an empty bill. It's just a shell, and it hops along as a shell, and then somewhere usually on a Sunday when I'm not looking, somebody will stuff something in there based on the fact it has a relating to clause. Anything related to healthcare can get shoved into that shell and it's on its way. So there might be lots of things going on out there that I simply don't know about.
I am receiving an initial indication that there is an intent to add this language. But again, I would encourage anyone who's interested to talk to Mr. Jadal about his intentions.
See, we know some things, we don't know everything. But again, just be aware that as a board member, you're supposed to be sitting here in your warm little pink bubble and we're taking care of you. But as a private citizen, an advocate, or a professional, you are completely free to do anything as long as people know what hat you're wearing. Cool?
All right, I have to wear a lawyer hat in 12 minutes. Speaking of hats.
Okay.
And I would
How's
cost us
everybody
quorum,
else's
I
hat
think.
doing? Are we have we completed our other board business?
They wanted to discuss the FAQ.
Oh, the FAQ. No, did they remember the FAQ? I thought we wanted to wait until that bill went through to see if. Okay, so I think Bob's okay. Bob, do you want to take over and make sure everything's okay with everybody? And I'll just slide over.
You can wrap it up. It's
Okay.
just reading out adjourning.
Okay.
If they're ready.
So did we get everybody? I know we talked about a lot of things. I think I know I have my marching orders. Does everybody else is everybody covered? Everyone's got what they need to talk about out? No issues, concerns? Well, again, I want to thank you all so much for being responsive to April, for being helpful to us and meeting with you. I don't generally like to do board meetings on Fridays, but meeting with you is always a joy because you read your materials, you're responsive, and you're always so full of information and great questions. So thank you for that. If that's it, our chair can read us the heck out of here.
Great. The Behavior Analysis Regulatory Board meeting is adjourned at 11:49 p.m.
At 11:49. Okay, well, we will see you in July.